the rising popularity of video games we see that a new standardized practice is coming into play within the last few years. I'm talking about microtransactions and paid DLC content, known as downloadable content. The controversy behind these practices is the fact that gamers see it as a way of putting a paywall in front of them so that they can't experience the full experience of a game unless they pay more money. They see it as completely unnecessary, that this should have come with the base game if it's something that tells a story or something like that. What I'm here to talk about today is that these two practices are necessary because they support a new era of gaming that is now becoming standardized even today. My main claims are the $60 selling price of a game is no longer as effective as it used to be. Advertisement in video game is crucial because it is such a competitive market. And the new standard of video game is that it's trending towards more multiplayer than any other single player game, and even single player games are starting to have an online component to them. For my first point, a brief history session of games back in the 80s and 90s tended to cost about in the low millions to develop. Around the 2000s, that's where games started to take about $10 million to make, and then by the end of the 2000s, the budget starting to standardize at around $20 million. In this new decade, games start to break about $50 million for big titles and start to hover around 35 for anything not known as popular, like Call of Duty or GTA. The problem here is that the games back in the 80s and 90s tended to cost about $25 to $35. Games today cost $60. The pace at which the selling price of a game has grown is only double, while the budgets have grown almost 30 times than their original predecessors. That seems to me that there needs to be something to make up that difference, and that's where microtransactions and DLCs come in. Especially since there's the misconception of $60, if you sell 1 million copies of a game, you get $60 million. That's not true. Especially since for a physical copy of a game, the LA Times made an article on the breaking down of what truly goes into the cost of making a game, stating that there's stuff like retail markup, refund policy, console manufacturer, distribution rates and such, and that by the end of the day, a developer only sees about $27 of that money actually go to them to pay for both marketing, development, talent, and etc. For advertising, I have a quote from Jesse Divinick, an industry researcher. Basically, he researches the industry so that he can he looks at trends, makes predictions, and then advises companies on what they should do. There's a quote. "Unfortunately, now you have the burden of knowledge. You can work as hard as you want on your game to make it as high quality as possible. But if the marketing is not there, it will fail." Basically, this is stating that if you don't get your name or brand out there, it will not succeed, because in this day and age, games are so competitive because there are so many new games releasing every week. The general rule of thumb is that for an average game, you spend about as much on marketing as you do on development. There are special cases, such as in the case of Ubisoft. With one of the lead designers, Stefan de Croo, this is a quote. "If the budget exceeds 50 million euros for development, it is without counting on the marketing, which can make double the total budget. So 50 million euros is roughly $68 million. So for a high-end budget game, you would spend about twice as that on marketing alone." My third point is that video games are no longer just a single player experience, that there's this trend of moving on towards a more community-based type thing, and that requires extra attention from developers. This is a quote from the lead designer of World of Warcraft in an interview where he was asked if high-budget single-player campaigns are a dying breed, and this was his response. "I do. I don't see them being a great business model for it in these days. It's really sad that there is just a lot of elements out there that conspire to make those games difficult to make now. Between pirating or the ability for people to rent, it's hard for publishers to pour millions and millions of dollars into a game and not necessarily see the return that they need to make those budgets realistic. In the recent times, as in Destiny, Call of Duty, all these other multiplayer games, we see the rise of things as servers and such, even in multiplayer, where developers use these as an answer for pirating, since for servers, they can track data, they can see code and everything, so that they can have real-time information. With all this, it comes with time and money that developers need to have the resources to make fixes, make fixes, patches, release new stuff, create new tools to fix these things and such. Gaming has also, like I said earlier in my thing, where it's moved on to a new era of, back in maybe 15 years ago, you go to a GameStop or whatever, you buy a game, you take it home, you never hear from a developer or anything ever again. If it's broken or something, you return it. Now in this day and age, games are, if something's wrong with a game, you go to a forum, you talk to community managers through Twitter or whatever, you tell them the problems of the game, and they spend time and money to fix it. Because now longevity and community is so prominent in games today. All these things take money and time. Thank you.
All right, the proposition, I think, is okay, except it seems to presuppose that there's an argument without necessarily showing us that the controversy exists. I'm not sure, nobody wants to pay more than they have to, I'm sure that that's true, but if there's been a wave of people who are grousing about how expensive the games are, or there's an unwillingness of them to support the games, or they're going out of their way to pirate the games, that would maybe generate a little bit more justification for your argument. As it is, you're basically coming down to the point that says, look, games cost more and they should. And I think that people will pay what they want to pay. You got to be careful, though, about falling into the area of making a value argument there. I do think that you kind of explained the business model a little bit. There's probably not a lot of controversy about how much money gets spent on making the games or how much it costs to market the games. The question, though, that I'm not seeing is where's the stuff that says that these games aren't succeeding, that they are failing, that that they're not making any money, that the companies are going bust because they aren't able to charge enough. I'm not sure that I hear anything that talks about how the business is problematic from the point of view of the investors and the companies getting a return on their games. I got some explanation about why they have to do things in a particular way. Now, for instance, you mentioned the microtransactions and downloadable contracts and all that sort of stuff. If there's a financial cost that comes with those kinds of things, and that financial cost is required in order for the game manufacturers to continue to function, we should have some economic data on that. How much money does that generate? Is that the difference between a game that cost them $60 million to develop and that they spent $120 million marketing, so they got to return $180 million, and they sell $200 million worth of the game, but they make their profit in the $70 million of microtransactions and downloadable contracts that they get? Okay, that would explain it a little bit more. As it is, I don't have any information on these things and what their economic impact on the gaming process is. So I got good information about the model as it has worked and how it's evolved, but for the purpose of your argument, which seems to be that they need this money in order to continue to succeed, I would think we'd need to know how much money they're getting and if that has kept them profitable. That's the kind of thing that I think is missing a little bit. There's good, like I said, the background information I thought was excellent, and you usually cite sources on that, so you're doing a good job on that. It's reasonably well organized, although I do think that you get a little bit I don't want to say off track, but it was less clear in that last section of the speech what was going on and how that affected the argument that you're making. All right, thank you. Kimberly. Hang on a second.